Welcome.
Shalom.
Shalom. Okay, let's get started.
Well, I just want to invite everybody and welcome you to this really interesting study. It's going to be from Acts chapters 20 to 24. I'm titling it Paul's Pentecost Appointment at Jerusalem and the Battle of the Calendars. And like I've mentioned, this is a three-part study. We do have 120 slides, so just sit back and enjoy and just have fun with the study. And yes, this is a teaching from Yah's Covenant Calendar. This is a very interesting teaching. I just want to give special credit and compliment to some Covenant Calendar members that did the initial workup for this study in Acts quite some time ago. And they sent it to me. Oh my goodness, it's about a year and a half ago. And their contribution was very helpful. It laid the foundation, and there's been a lot more added to it. Also, special thanks to Sabina in Germany for some of her beautiful artwork that we just enjoy so much. She's a great part of the team. But perhaps that this particular study is a conclusion of the Joshua Sickle teaching. There's been 9 in that series that was started quite some time ago, but I think this might be number 10. It might be the wrap up. So there's a lot of information that was given in the other 9 presentations that we will not be doing a review for. But it is a big research project, and I just want to show you a little bit of how this is going to work so you kind of have an idea of where this is going and what to expect. Like I said, it will be in 3 parts. I have 10 sections. The first thing that we're going to do is talk about the purpose of this study. And then we're going to just have a very short review of some Omer count from former studies. Of some other calendars talk about the Omer count should be this, or you should start it here, or it should be that. So we're just going to, just 2 slides on that. It's a 2-slide review of basically 9 other teachings. We just want to do a little short review or overview of Paul's journeys, not too long. And then I want to show you how this study was researched because it's a very different study. Then I want to show you with a few slides how this study will be conducted because it's quite different than the researching, but you need to have an understanding of how it was researched so you can understand how it got put together, so we can get to the end result. In section 6, there's going to be quite a few maps about Paul's journey with his other 9 companions. We need to look at exactly where they were, how long they were there, what was the distance of travel between these places. I really want you to pay attention to the maps and to orient yourself with where these places are, because it's going to be very important with the study when we do mark out the calendar, okay? And then just a little bit of information in section 7 on the general background information of the travelers. That's important too. There's important information there that's going to be coming forward near the end of the study with Paul. Then in section number 8, we will start part 2. I need to show you the geography of the locations. We're going to go through each one of these cities and towns or whatever and show you the geography, give you a little bit of a background. You'll need to understand that as well. And there is a secret of the Gulf of Latmus that really impacts the study. So we'll spend about 25 slides in that area. And then after that, you will be ready to walk through Acts chapters 20 to 24. Now, we're not going to do all of the scriptures. I'm just going to pick out the scriptures that have calendar language in there, and we're going to walk through it so that you can kind of see how this journey works, what the events are, get this all connected to the geography, have it in your mind. There's a lot of calendar language in these scriptures. And there's going to be a little lesson on meteorology. We have to do that as well, believe it or not. And then in part 3, This is going to be basically the last half of the study. It's the part that you're all going to be waiting for. We are going to start charting all of these calendar clues onto month calendars, and we will chart them step by step. So it's the last half of the study. Very, very interesting part. But unless you hear the first 9 sections, you might be a little bit lost for part number 3. So just wanted to let you know kind of what's coming up. Now, this particular study has many major calendar puzzle pieces in this journey of Paul and Luke and the rest of the companions. There's many of them, but I'm picking out only 4 that I want you to pay attention to as we go through. Meteorology is the first one that comes up, and this is the crux of the whole study. The next one is going to be the Gulf of Latmus and Miletus. What is happening here that is so important? Number 3, Ephesus. Ephesus is actually connected with the Miletus part, and so that is another piece that is very, very important when we get to the end of the study. And then I've picked out Paul's Nazirite vow. Didn't quite understand this when I first started out, but it is also a very important part of this study. These are the 4 major ones. There's many of them, but these are the 4 major ones. Now, every piece of this calendar puzzle is important, but these 4 are extreme importance, and they are going to lead to what I call a covenant calendar crunch. But we're not going to give you the crunchy news today. We're going to save that. Now, I want to take you back to Meteorology. This is going to be the piece that you're looking for that's going to pull everything together. And when you see my little man there with a puzzle piece, he will show up throughout the calendar slides. When you see the little man with a puzzle piece, just know that that's something to pay attention to. So those are some of the things that I want you to watch for and have fun with. So let's start in section number 1. What is the purpose of this study anyway? Well, in the return trip of Paul's 3rd journey, he was determined that he was going to arrive at Jerusalem for Shavuot or Pentecost that year. And we all know by now that the Omer count on its way to Pentecost begins with wave sheaf, or some say first fruits. It's the same thing. So the wave sheaf is the day that gets Omer count number 1. And we need to count out, well, we have found it's 50 days. 50 days until you get to the festival for Pentecost. So the Joshua series is a wonderful witness from the Old Testament that completely aligns with the Torah guidelines that were written by Moses to verify that the Omer count is only 50 days. So that's what we're going to do in this study, because there are some people that say, no, it's not 50 days, it's something else. But the search in this study is to determine if Luke and Paul's testimony in Acts is going to be in alignment with Torah and with Joshua. There's a whole series of Joshua studies. And will it show the exact length of the Omer count? Now, I want to say that's where this study started. I'm looking to see if the witness by Luke and Paul is going to be 50 days. That's where it started, but that's not where it ends up. So the question is, will Luke and Paul need 50 days or 99 days to reach Jerusalem in time for Pentecost? That's what we're looking for, but we might have some other surprises. Now, just a very short review. Number 1, the Joshua Sickle series was actually debunking just one portion of the Enoch calendar. Lots of times, the Dead Sea calendars are kind of all on the same page. Some of them vary a little bit, but basically Enoch's wave sheaf delay is 1 full week. And you know, when there's any errors that are found within any festal calendar, if there's an error, that calendar is automatically labeled by Torah as a counterfeit. You can throw it out right there. Well, the Enoch calendar places wave sheaf outside the Passover festival week, and that is going to alter the Omer count to Pentecost or Shavuot. Now, just as a very short review, if Passover is on a third cycle or a Tuesday of that week, what Moses has instructed and what Joshua follows is that you have to come all the way to the weekly Sabbath, and then the very next day is considered the wave sheaf or first fruits festival. But that's not what this particular Enoch study does. They place wave sheaf 1 week later. They place it outside the Passover festival week. So wave sheaf is supposed to be within the Passover festival week, not outside of it. We spent a lot of time showing why that is not correct, about 9 sessions, 9 teachings. And I just want you to remember, if there's only one error, it's one error too many. And these particular calendars have many errors, but this was the one that we were focusing on. So that was one thing that we were looking at in the Joshua Sickle series. But there was another faulty count that we were looking at, and it was one that was talking about an extension of 49 days. In part 4 of the Sickle series, we found that some keep a 99-day Omer count. And guess where it lands up? You count 99 days, and it ends up at honoring that golden calf. So we just felt that definitely cannot represent Shavuot or Pentecost. It has to be a mistake, a huge mistake. So those were the things that we were talking about in that 9-part series. Lots of review there. But today, we're going to take it one step further, because now we're popping into the New Testament. So the Omer count, 50 days or 99 days? You know, we are really at a point now where we need to have a decision, and it must be made. But I can tell you, one thing is really sure, that Pentecost was still being observed by the followers of Yahushua about 30 years after the crucifixion. And when I looked in my Bibles, some of you have Bibles that will have dates listed there in the margins. Some say that the date of this particular story is 59 to 60 AD. Well, that's helpful. It gives you kind of an idea that this is basically 30 years after the cross. But we shall see if 59 to 60 AD is a contender for the date. We will look at that in a lot of detail. The witnesses in this study are Luke and Paul. It's just amazing that Luke has recorded every detail, including Paul's testimony that relates specifically to calendar timing. We are going to hear the words out of Paul's mouth himself. And the following instruction that is below it, Philippians, is from Paul. This instruction in Philippians was given about 7 years after the Acts 20 to 24 story, about 7 years after. So please take note as to exactly what Paul is conveying to his audience. Let's read it. There's 2 verses. In 3:17, Paul is saying, "Brethren, join in following my example and note those who so walk." He's talking about those that are walking with him. "Following my example, as you have us for a pattern." And then in 4 verse 9, he says, "The things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do." And then there's a blessing. "And the Elohim of peace will be with you." This is a very important verse. We will come back to it, because we have an example in this study of Paul and counting. And we know that covenant calendar is all about counting. But I'm going to pose a question here right at the beginning. Will this study be way more than just an Omer count study? Maybe we'll have some surprises. There are 3 Passover pillars that establish patterns in covenant calendar. You will find these 3 studies in your scriptures. It's a study of Moses at Egypt when they left Egypt, and that particular Passover was on a Tuesday, a 3rd cycle. We have the witness of Yahusha. That's a very strong pillar in the Gospels, where his Passover was on the midst of the week or a Wednesday. And then we have a witness in Joshua, where the Passover for that particular year was on a weekly Shabbat. These are 3 solid witnesses about where Passover can fall in the scriptures. And just remember, if you don't remember, I will remind you that in some of the Enoch calendars, their Passover lands on a Tuesday, a 3rd cycle every single year. So they've totally bypassed Yahusha's work and Joshua's work, where Passover can fall on any day. So these are 3 solid witnesses. Now, you know that we have always taught you need to keep things in order. Well, you can definitely see that this order of Moses, Yahusha, and Joshua is not in order, but it is in order for something else. And we're not going to tell you what that is today, but it is something else. I'm just going to pose a question here about Noah. What about Noah's calendar clues? Because he has some things for us to understand as well. Now, as we go to slide number 10, and Tim's going to help me with this slide. This is section number 2. It's a review of Omer counts from the former studies. This is just a little tiny review. So he's going to give you a review of these 3 Passovers that we have already talked about. Okay, Tim, thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Charlene, for the opportunity. Number 1, Moshe's Exodus from Egypt. This is the first Passover template in the scriptures. Why is it the first? Because it is the complete picture, the overall guide template that we need to know for our calendar. Exodus 12, it's the first month. Passover is Abib 14. And in this great year, it was on a 3rd cycle. And the Sabbath was on the 18th, and the wave sheaf was on the 19th. And this would begin the pattern of the Omer count. Exodus 16, in the 2nd month, the manna week stabilizes the full Omer count. I would like to draw your attention to this pillar that Charlene so wisely placed here. This is not like the pillars before. This is the manna pillar. What was happening at this time? The Hebrew nation had come out. They had forgotten about the Sabbath. Yahuwah was going to establish his Sabbath. When a surveyor lays out his plans and surveys the country, he puts a corner stake in the ground from which everything relates to. Yahuwah, with this pillar, the manna pillar, is placing his stake on the ground, and he is teaching the Hebrew nation about the Shabbat. That is the premier flagship, the premier feast of Yahuwah. So this is the base foundation of the calendar, the manna week. It is from this manna week that you count forwards and you count backwards. It is from the manna week that you can determine exactly what day of the week that the Passover began on this month, and the day that the year began on this year. The manna week is a absolutely incredibly solid pillar. It is, how can I describe it? If you had a plane and you flew across the sky with a big banner and said, this is what Yahuwah needs us to base our calendar on, it is the manna week. Why? Because this is how he determined the Shabbat. Exodus 19, in the 3rd month. Shavuot, Omer, number 50. It was on the 8th day, and that would be the 1st cycle after the 7th-day Sabbath, exactly as Leviticus 23 requires. And what about this 99-day count? Have you realized the 99-day count reaches to the golden calf? Have you realized that they were honoring, or that the people today that want to observe a 99-day count to the Omer are honoring the golden calf. If you haven't realized that, we have the study where it is all laid out, and you can look at that in great detail. Yes, it is a false double count to the Omer. Joshua tells us exactly how to determine the wave sheaf date to arrive at the correct Torah Omer count after Moshe died. Joshua observed Passover on Shabbat that year. Yes, and that is in exact opposition to what tradition teaches us. Tradition has told us that you can't have a Passover on a Shabbat. And their calendar is manipulated, adjusted, and moved so that the Passover is not on a Shabbat. But what does the scriptures tell? What does Joshua document? His Passover was on a Shabbat. Number 3, Yahusha's Omer count must align with Torah, for Yahusha is the one that originally wrote it before the foundations of the earth. It must align with Moses and Joshua. The crucifixion, the first month, Passover, Abib 14, in this great year, was on the 4th cycle, midst of the week. Yes, that is a Wednesday in pagan terms, and we have been taught to overlook that until we come to the calendar and we dig in. It was midst of the week, most certainly. The Shabbat was on the 17th, and the wave sheaf, the etzem, or the bone structure of our salvation, was on the 18th, and it is the beginning of the Omer count, which happened on the first cycle of the week, and that is the day that Yahusha met Mary at dawn. And number 2, the second ascension of Yahusha occurred on the 40th day of the Omer count. This is the 27th day of the second month. What's interesting about that 27th day? Well, it's the exact same date that Noah left the ark. Could that be a prophetic marker documented at the flood? Would it be interesting if you found out that the only year that 27th day aligns up with the 40th day of the Omer count is on 30 of the Common Era, the year that Yahusha was crucified? This pattern is when Yahusha left this earth. It's the pattern of when Noah left the ark. Acts 2, Pentecost was fully come, and it was 10 days later. This shows very clearly that there is only a 50-day Omer count, and we have other accounts that show this too. And today is going to be another incredibly solid witness to a 50-day Omer count. I hope you're paying attention. There's 3 witnesses to the 50-day Omer count. And I ask you, Charlene asks you, is there a 4th witness with Paul's adventures? Is it going to become clear? And I am quite positive that the detail that is in ahead of you is going to just hold you spellbound, and I'm sure you'll be blessed. Thank you, Charlene.
Yes, the Manna Week has patterns, and right there is where we need to remember that patterns are very, very important, and there are patterns in calendar. So I just want to go ahead a little bit and just expand on that 3rd witness of Yahusha's ministry. Yes, Yahusha's ministry through the covenant calendar of the Gospels, it definitely does uphold the witnesses in Torah and Joshua for a 50-day Omer count. But I just want to give you a few verses. In Acts 1, 3-4, you'll find that Yahusha was seen of men for 40 days after his ascension. Then in verse 5, there's some very interesting wording. Yahusha commanded the assembly to wait in Jerusalem, not many days, to receive his baptism. This phrase, not many days, is going to come up later in the study. In Deuteronomy 16:9 are the Torah instructions, at least one set of them. From the time that the sickle is put forth to the grain, the count for 7 weeks begins, and then the 50th day of Shavuot arrives. In Acts chapter 2, verse 1, this is what it says. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, the assembly were anointed by the Ruach. Point number 5, the assembly waited 10 days. That qualifies as a time of not many days. Whereas if they had to wait 49 or 50 days, that would not qualify for the phrase not many days. That's something to think about. We need to pay attention to even these small details. Hermeneutic rule, we're going to have 2 witnesses from Yahusha and from Paul. And remember that in the presence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a truth is established. And I know that some say that this is only for penalty of stoning by death, etc. But guess what? It is a hermeneutic principle that applies across the board. In Matthew 18, it's words from Yahusha himself that said, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, what? Every word may be established. And in 2 Corinthians 13, verse 1, Paul said almost exactly the same thing. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. That is absolutely true. Basically, everyone, the Omer count of 50 days to Shavuot is already established. There is no question about that. So the question now today is there any reason to look for a 4th witness? In these last 2 slides, Tim has given you basically an overview of the study in about 20 hours of work through the Joshua Sickle series in these 2 slides. So there's lots to look at. But as we go forward, really think about it. Is there any reason that we need to be looking for a 4th witness to this Omer count? Well, let's look at section 3. Just a very short overview of Paul's missionary journeys. You can see the chart here. But what we're focusing on today is that Paul wants to get to Jerusalem for Pentecost, and this is on his return trip of the 3rd journey. We're not going to do the whole trip, just when he decides that he's going to be coming back. So we're not going to be looking at all of the places of the whole 3rd journey of Galatia and coastal Asia, but it basically starts in Macedonia and continues forward. And then we're going to be looking at a little bit of the arrest that Paul goes through in Jerusalem and this trial in prison and how he ends up coming back up to Caesarea. We're going to look at that as well. Now, this part of his 3rd journey is actually from Acts 18 all the way to Acts 26. But we're going to be taking out just a portion of that and be looking at just chapters 20 to 24. We'll just do a little bit extra on this overview about Luke's record of Paul's 3rd journey. Paul knew that this was the last time that he would see the assemblies that he had labored for so many years. Yet, he says he was in a hurry. In Acts 20, you will find that between verses 3 and 12, that Paul had an all-night sermon at Troas. We're going to talk about that. Then there's another several verses where Paul had an urgent farewell with the elders of Ephesus at Miletus. Why not at Ephesus? Why didn't he stop there? In Acts 21, there is an urging to Paul, do not go to Jerusalem and be bound and be delivered to the Romans. It's not a good idea. He was told 2 times. And then in Acts 21:13, Paul said, you know what? That's quite all right. He's ready to die for Yahusha. It doesn't matter. He's going up to Jerusalem. Point number 2. If the Omer count is really 99 days, would Paul need to feel such an urgency to get to Jerusalem at a certain time? Don't you think that he could take his time? That's something to think about. And number 3, is this study so important that it's going to be Paul's very last chance to establish a particular Omer count for once and for all? Is this going to be Paul's last witness where he says, this is the way it works, everybody. Do it the way I'm showing you. Follow the pattern. Or point number 4, will this witness root covenant calendar deeper into Torah? Will it go way deeper than just an Omer count? Paul said, if possible, he wanted to be at Jerusalem for Pentecost. And the reason that Paul said, if possible, is because gaining passages on ships was uncertain, not to mention the possibility of unfavorable winds and other delays that might occur, or having to depend on someone else. But we're going to find out that once he reached Tyre and Caesarea, it's very evident that Paul had a very prosperous journey. He did find ships and he didn't have to wait too long. And the winds were favorable. And he was well ahead of schedule because he stayed for 7 days at Tyre and many days at Caesarea. So he would not have done this if he was not making good time. We need to remember that. Luke has recorded these details just incredibly. Now, in section 4, I just want to take 2 slides to show you how this study was researched, because it's quite different. In these chapters 20 to 24, they contain details for this study. Although there's going to be some information gathered from other parts of Luke's writings in Acts, this is where the details are going to be found. In point number 2, we want to have an understanding of the geographical area because it's absolutely necessary. You need to be able to differentiate between a city and a town and a province. So when you hear Macedonia, I want you to think about a province, not a city. That's really important. We need to have an overview of the geographical area. We'll do this through a variety of maps. And the question is, why in the world am I dragging you through that? Well, part of this geographical area has had considerable changes from then until now. So we need to look at that because it is a major puzzle piece. Point number 3, there is an urgency of time, apparently, to arrive at Jerusalem before Pentecost. So that means that all the timing decisions about this calendar count are going to be made accordingly. Number 4, we have to think about these weather elements because they're going to affect the sailing times. The winds are needed for sailing, and those winds change with the seasons. Now we know that Paul is sailing during the Omer count, so this is going to be during spring weather conditions. Let's carry on with point number 5. Some ships will carry cargo for a short sail delivery to local places. They will come in and out quite a bit, and other ships will make longer hauls to remote places. So that's kind of important too. We need to ask the question, which ships will Paul try to board for this return of his 3rd journey? And will Paul board a ship if it is too close to the Sabbath? Or do you think that he would stay with a congregation for the Sabbath? What do you think would be the case? There are different methods of traveling that are found in this study, either by sailing and by walking. So when Paul is sailing by ship, we're going to make some reasonable estimates. That's going to happen when we look at the weather elements for the spring. And sometimes they're walking. And we will make reasonable estimates about the distance that they have to walk. And we will use approximately 3 to 4 miles per hour for walking. That's a pretty brisk walk when they're carrying all their items. In section number 5, we are going to look at how this study will be conducted because it's a little different than how it was researched. When Luke gives specific calendar details, we will follow them exactly. And he says on the same day, we will leave the event on the same day. If he says the next day or the day after or the following day, we will follow those clues and we will mark the calendar accordingly. We're going to take a lot of care to observe the weekly Sabbaths. We're going to note that necessary ship trips will likely not be scheduled beginning with the Sabbath. It depends on the dates of the month and the length of travel. But of course, we know that some of his travels by sea are very long. So in that case, there's no choice. He will be on a ship during the Sabbath. But what I'm trying to say is that if they're going from one place to the next, and it happens to be a preparation sixth cycle or a Friday, I don't believe he would have boarded the ship for a Sabbath sail. The best estimates for sea travel, that is from one destination to another, are going to be given considering distances, the local weather, the type of conditions for that time of the year. We're going to look at everything. Now, what about distance and time calculations? Many say that Paul's trip to Jerusalem needed at least a 99-day Omer count, and here's the reason why. Because the trip is way over 1,100 miles or 1,760 kilometers. And the other reason they say it has to be 99 days is that Paul had a lot of lengthy stops and he had some delays. And that's what they based this whole thing on, okay? He needed 99 days because it was a very long trip. Well, I agree, it was a very long trip. But this study is going to count the time and the distances according to reasonable data. And that data is, as I have already said, includes walking times of approximately 3 to 4 miles per hour carrying their belongings, and reasonable times of waiting to find new sailing arrangements. And also sailing times according to the wind speeds in April and in May. About these winds, the winds in the first month of April, they're around 7.5 miles per hour in this area in the Aegean Sea. The winds in the second month of May, they are going to actually bump up to 9 miles per hour. So that means that your ship can go a little faster. And the winds usually come up at dawn and they die down at sunset. That was something that I had to learn as well. And I also had to learn that many times a ship didn't go anywhere at night. It just sat there on the water because there was no wind. That's called being becalmed. Therefore, the sea captains would generally not sail at night unless they knew that there was going to be wind, which would often be understood when they watched the cloud formations. We're going to do some work about the clouds. Well, what kind of ships would Paul be sailing on? You know, in Acts, Luke doesn't give us any information about the kinds of ships that the apostles embarked on during their sea journeys. And in addition to small coastal vessels, ancient literature also mentions the existence of very large ships. And look, with the capacity of as many as 600 passengers or more. This was very different than the many small boats that would sail along the coast coming into harbor each night. These little boats would hop from one port to the other, and you know what? They would collect any kind of available passenger or merchandise. They needed to make money to get their ship sailing. On these kinds of coastal boats, you would have merchants, exiles, prostitutes, or priests. They all traveled together. And as they made zigzags between the islands and the mainland, and the traveling merchants would all be collecting timber from Phoenicia, copper and wine from Cyprus, amphorae from Rhodes, and Samos or grain mills from Kos. They were all there doing their business as well. So these ships were a great means for merchants to purchase and to sell items that, you know, was their business. Well, these kinds of ships, they didn't really have a schedule. There was no schedule, you know what, we're leaving tomorrow at such and such a time, so just be here. It didn't work that way. It worked like this. When the captain decided that his business was done at that port and the wind was favorable, he would send one of the crew to announce in the streets and the taverns of the port that he was going to be leaving soon and everybody better get on the ship. And by the time darkness fell, if he had been on his ship during the day, unless he reached a port, he usually found a sheltered shallow bay and he would drop anchor and he would beach his ship. So if they didn't get a good start, they usually wouldn't go. But the captain was in charge of when that ship left and when it didn't. Now, just in case you don't remember, I want to remind you that reasonable assessments of time are going to be made for every detail. We are not going to force an Omer count of 50 to fit the Torah requirements, and we are not going to try to extend unnecessarily any of the times to get to reach to an Omer 99 count. We're going to use reasonable assessments for sailing, for walking, for whatever it might be, reasonable assessments. In section number 6, we are going to start looking at some maps. I want you to orient yourself with where Paul was and his traveling companions and get accustomed to seeing where he was so that when we talk about it, when we're reading the scriptures, that you're going to have an idea. We need to note the cities and the towns and the provinces on this trip. We're going to note the difference of travel on land and travel by sea. And we're also going to find out that his return back to Jerusalem by sea was probably quicker than going back through the land. So what I'll show you is that Paul's third journey started here at Antioch. He started out and he went across the land. He trucked all the way across. He gets to Ephesus, and then he takes this route, and they had good roads, good Roman roads, all the way up to Troas. And then, of course, he would have to take a ship, and he took a ship over to Philippi, and he continued his journey all the way down, okay, into this part to Corinth. And we're going to find out what happened here and why he made the decision to come back up where he had retraced his steps here, back up through Macedonia and back to Philippi, okay, and then take his journey back down to Jerusalem. So before reading Luke's account and charting the Omer count journey on the calendar months, we're going to gather information of each stop between Philippi and Jerusalem so that we can aid in the calculation of this trip, because it's supposed to be a very urgent trip. And still the question is there any possible way that Paul needed a full 99 days to be on time for this festival? After 3 months in Corinth, and Corinth is right over here in the left, Paul planned that he was going to sail to Syria. And when he discovered a plot to waylay him on the voyage, when he was at Corinth, he was planning to sail across. He was planning to sail across the Aegean Sea and just come straight over. But there was something going on, and he heard about it, and he decided to return, like I said, back up through Macedonia. He came back up through Macedonia. He would get to Philippi, and then he would retrace his steps all the way back to Jerusalem. So we're going to look at some approximate distances in this section. As you know, Philippi to Jerusalem, it's over 1,100 miles. And here's a little table. We'll be using all of these approximate distances, and they're actually pretty close. We will use these to figure out where Paul is on every day of the Omer count. And by the way, you'll see this again. This area here is called the Levant. That includes Syria and Israel, and Jerusalem, of course, is there. In section 7, I just want to give you a little bit of general background information that's going to be helpful for later on. In the book of Acts, Luke is the author, and he's writing to Theophilus and the other people that are going to be first readers at that time. First readers is important. Luke is writing to Theophilus and first readers that actually have an understanding of that part of the Roman Empire that we do not have today. That's why I had to sit down and look at everything, because I didn't even know where the places were. Theophilus and his first readers, they would have understood the sailing times and the short stops and the long hauls. They would have probably understand which ship to catch, and they would have understood the weather restrictions. They would have understood where to find the local assemblies. We're going to look at why did Paul bypass Ephesus? Because this is a stop that he likely could have made. And why did he go to Miletus and then send elders up to Ephesus to come down to Miletus to see him? Now, it's, yes, he could have stopped there. He could have found a ship that was going there. No, he was not in charge of the ship. The captain was. But Paul could have found a ship, I'm pretty sure, to stop at Ephesus and to make this big announcement to the elders, but he didn't do it. This is a very interesting part of the study, especially with his urgency and determination to get to Pentecost. So now the question is, would Theophilus understand Paul's reasoning for this, or Luke's reason for writing this information down, when Theophilus and all the rest knew that Ephesus would have been an easy stop? So like I said, the Ephesus Miletus details are really important in this study. A little bit more background information, this time on the travelers. There were 9 companions traveling with Paul to Jerusalem, and they were representatives from various assemblies. We're going to look at representatives from Macedonia and from Asia. From Macedonia, we know Luke was from Philippi, right up there in the corner, and Sopater was from Berea, you can see that, and Aristarchus and Secundus were from Thessalonica. This is all up in Macedonia. From Asia, we have several other representatives. We have Gaius that was from around Derbe, and Timothy is from Lystra, approximately in this area. Then there is Tychicus and Trophimus. They're from Ephesus. Now I have a star with them. Their names, they are from Ephesus. Remember their names, remember Ephesus. And then there's Onesimus. He's from Colossus. Remember, he was the runaway slave of Philemon. So we have representatives from Macedonia and from Asia. These are the people that are traveling with Luke and Paul. So that is the end of part 1. That is a lot of information that you're going to be using to understand what's coming up next.